You are now listening to the Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks podcast, brought to you by Solid.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks. Today, I have Rittika with me from Thomson Reuters. Hello, Rittika.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast. So, for the audience who doesn't know, I saw Rittika present at the Gartner DNA conference a year ago in Florida. Actually, a year and 2 weeks, I think, ago, and I was amazed by her presentation. She was talking about something called OpenC2, which we'll talk about in a second. And then since then, I've been following you, Rittika, and you've been building more and more interesting things around AI, and I'm so happy to have you here. So maybe for our listeners first, let's start with some background. So you're at Thomson Reuters, you're a principal engineer. So what does Thomson Reuters do for those who didn't hear the Joel Ron episode that I did? And then what do you do as a principal engineer?
First of all, thank you, Yoni, for having me. And thank you so much for attending my talk at Gartner. I think it was one of a kind experience. Now, coming back to Thomson Reuters, coming back to what I am doing at Thomson Reuters. So let's start with TR. I think it's important to maybe continue the conversation that Joel started. So at Thomson Reuters, we are mainly a trusted global content and technology company. And when I say content and technology company, we mainly focus on empowering professionals, in legal, tax, risk, compliance, and journalism. Our key focus is about building professional grade AI products. So we have two main products, Westlaw and Practical Law, which are used by these professionals to help their customers, to help their clients. And when I talk about what I do at TR, I'm part of a team called Content Innovation. We are the R&D team in the content space at TR, and it's a mixture of scientists and research engineers. And our job is to design and build innovative solutions to have, it's about how we process our content, how we deliver the content into a product like Westlaw and Practical Law.
Okay, so Thomson Reuters delivers tools for people in the legal space, and as part of that, they research content, case law, history, etc. And you're part of the in doing that. So, give us maybe an example or two that you're comfortable with. What does innovation in content for law do? Like, how does it look like?
So I think we can look at it like today, most of the companies or more the enterprises are looking at building AI, building with AI, building AI. And our team also focuses on, building agents or building these agentic workflows. So you have, when you're processing content, you would have a pipeline that you will build to process content, to deliver content to a product. So our team takes care of, enriching these pipeline, processing this pipeline using AI, using the tools and technology that are available to process and to enrich the content for a product.
Okay, so
And
a
I
year
think,
ago, yes, I good.
yeah, no, I was just saying, just adding to this. And what makes this really interesting is the precision, the volume that's required, right? So when, let's say, legal professionals are using our products, they're using our products to file cases, to help their customers, which could impact their lives, their careers, all of that. So the impact is not about just delivering the content, it's about delivering the content with accuracy, delivering the content faster, right? So our pipelines have to have all of these features that that takes care of the accuracy and the content currency as well.
So all those news articles we see where lawyers use AI to draft legal arguments,
Yeah.
and the AI quotes things that don't exist and hallucinates, etc. You're helping them avoid that, essentially, making sure that they
Exactly.
don't make that mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not like a metric or a check that we have to have. It's like it's rooted in our products, right? It's like a professional trust bar that's built into our products. And this sorts of drives everything that we do, right? All the designing, all the building of the products. Like accuracy is the key.
That makes sense. There are, a lot of times people talk about what's the level of accuracy that's required in different flows.
Yeah.
When reporting financials to the stock market, obviously accuracy has to be 100%. When, answering just simple questions, maybe less. But in your case, people's lives depend on this, and you need to make sure that you're accurate. So, okay, so let's double click and zoom in a bit more. So you're using AI to accelerate the innovation within that process of content generation. And you write a lot online about the journey that you've gone through from, a year plus ago with OpenC2 that you talked about at Gartner to how do software teams work like today. So maybe if I start with OpenC2, that was a year and a bit ago. What was it? What was that project that you talked about at Gardner?
Yeah, so Open Setu, Setu is a Sanskrit word. It means bridge. So Open
Hmm.
Setu is a data agent that helps the professionals in TR to understand the data, right? So let's say if I am into marketing or HR or sales, I want to look at the data. But right now you would have data analyst in between, so as a non-technical user, I would ask them the kind of data that I want. Then these data analysts will write the Python code or the SQL code, and then they will fetch the data, create these reports, and then send these reports, right? So we wanted to bridge this gap so that our non-technical users can directly interact with the data. So OpenSetu was a data agent which allows a non-technical customer rather to interact with the data. So you write a question in a natural language, right? What were my sales last year, or how many employees are on leave this month, right? So you ask a question, and OpenSetu converts this natural language question into Python or SQL depending upon the complexity of the question. So it has a list of tools at its access. So it writes the code and then it runs the code on the data and then gets the data to the HR or to the marketing professional. So it
And
sorts of like bridge the gap. So we called it the data analyst agent because it's like writing the code for you. It's bringing the data to you.
and we talk a bit about accuracy. What is the accuracy of OpenC2? What was the accuracy of the tool? How did you measure it? Can you walk
Yeah.
us through that a bit?
Absolutely. So it's a tool which is backed by the data, right? So the tool is not generating the data, it's generating the code for you, right? So the tool generates the code and it runs the code. And then the code runs on the data that's already there. So when you run the code on the data, it gets you the accurate data. But we didn't just stop and relied on how this code was generated. We of course went on and added evaluation. We had the ground truth data. So we did a lot of evaluation about the data that it was generating at that time. Even like now, everything that we developed is sort of evaluation driven and test driven. We make sure that we have the ground truth data. We are evaluating whatever we are building, starting from day one.
Okay, so essentially, you knew what the answers were to some questions, and then you said, "Okay, we'll run these questions. We'll
Yeah.
see what answer OpenC2 gives us, and then we'll compare it to the actual answer that we expected, and see that they're the same." Which is makes sense. That's exactly how evaluations work, and we see it in a lot of places. Of course, we also have it in our own platform in Solid, but that's kind of the approach, as you're saying. You start from evaluation so that you can test that you can rely on this thing. That was about a year plus ago. Since then, you posted a lot about how software development looks like today. And there were a couple posts that you put on recently that I want to dig into those. So, with one of them, you talked about how the work of software development has changed completely. The places that people are now putting their effort and emphasis, and your own people, your own architects, your own software developers have shifted their focus because they're now using AI to write the code for them. So let's dig into that one first. So tell me a bit about what you wrote there.
Yeah, I think honestly, it has changed even since the last time I wrote my blog. Like it has changed so much since then. And I think I need to write a new blog. But let's talk about that blog. I think it was about how our software engineers focuses more on the planning, on the designing rather than writing code. So
Mhm.
earlier, let's say you would, as a software developer, you would spend 30% of your time designing and planning. But now you spend 70% of your time on designing and planning, where you're asking questions like, why am I doing this? Like, for example, let's take a very simple example, right? You are converting, let's say, we are in content space, right? We do a lot of formatting, a lot of conversions, etc. So you're converting from one format to another format. Earlier you would maybe research, or you will look about, okay, how does this format work? But now our software engineers ask questions like, do I really need this format? So that's the design thinking that has changed, in this life cycle. But, I think I wrote that blog maybe a month or two ago. Right now, our focus has shifted, slightly more in towards AI native engineering. So at that time, we were focusing on using AI to write code to help us plan, implement, right? But now we look at this AI native engineering where we say the whole SDLC cycle is built using AI. Now, if we look at like the whole SDLC cycle, you have planning, right? So you get the requirement, you do the plan, you do the design, then you develop, you test, you debug, then you deploy to production, right? So it's like a full life cycle. So now we have AI at all of these stages, right? So we start with plan, you plan with AI, then you write code with AI. But we also now have built our skills, which allows us to test, which allow us to debug, right? So a lot of us in our project, we use Claude Code, as
Mhm.
our AI dev tool. So what we have done, we of course have tools or skills that allow us to write code, review the code, but we now all have skills that helps us test the code. So we have built end-to-end testing using Claude skills that allows us to test. So when I say test, I don't just mean the unit test or the integration test. I mean actually running the whole workflow is built in Claude Code, right? And then your logs, let's say we're using AWS, so our logs goes into CloudWatch. Our agents have LangFuse built in, right? So we have skills that gets us LangFuse logs. So everything sort of comes into the same terminal. We pull in all the logs onto the same terminal, and then we debug. Like whenever there is an error, we debug in the same terminal. So you see, like that's how we bring the whole SDLC cycle into our same terminal.
So, okay. So let me see if I understood correctly. So let's say there's a type of content you want to pull onto the platform.
Yes.
So your team needs to build essentially the pipeline that pulls it in, right? That pulls and adapts it and modifies, etc., and loads it into the platform. Now, an activity like that, an item like that, starts with, okay, we need a plan. We need a plan. What we're going to bring,
Yeah.
from what sources, how are we going to convert it, how are we going to prepare it for the designated platform, and of course test it along the way. So there's the plan of that, of what we're going to build. Then there's the
Mhm.
building of the code, so actually writing the code, of course. Then there's the testing of it, and to see, is it working? It
Yeah.
pulls the content. Is it, is it making the conversions? Are the results the way that you expected? And if they're not the way that you expected, how do you debug that? And your point is, in every single phase, AI is involved. So let's start maybe from the planning. What
Yeah.
what tools are you using? What's your methodology for using AI within the planning for a work item like the one I just described?
Okay, yeah. So if we start from, let's say, just plan, so all the developers create a plan document, right? So you
Hmm.
write, work with Claude to create a plan document, and that plan documents get reviewed within the team depending on the impact of that story or impact of the feature that you're working on, right? So let's say if you are just fixing bug, a small work doesn't, the plan doesn't need to be reviewed by everyone. But if it's like a bigger story that you're working on, the plan needs to be reviewed. Get the plan reviewed by the reviewers or by the senior engineers. So
Hmm.
now that plan just doesn't sit in a software developer's laptop. The plan actually goes into our GitHub, right? So we
Okay.
have a go where the plan sits. So you take the plan, you get the plan reviewed, then you go into writing code using that plan. right?
Okay.
So you've written the code. Now you are going to create a PR that has your code and your plan.
Okay. So the
Right.
original plan goes into GitHub, probably a markdown file, I assume. Yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
markdown file. Senior engineers review it. By the way, when the senior engineers review it, do they actually read through it, or do they use their own AI to review the plan that you propose? Like
Yeah,
how does that work?
that's a good question. I think initially when we started, we sort of struggled with, like, do I start reviewing the plan also with AI? But over the time, we have realized we have actually cut down what we write in the plan. So it's easy for me to like just quickly glance over it. So I usually read like, maybe first 10 lines and I know what the 1,000 lines of code are about. Right.
Yeah.
So if the plan is too big, you would need AI, right, to
Yeah.
ship faster. But the plan is like really sophisticated. It's really about what you are doing. So it becomes really easy to read the plan by a human
Okay.
as well.
Makes sense. I use Cursor a lot. I have it plan most features in advance, and usually I read the top.
Yeah.
I don't usually read the actual implementation. I mean, in my case, the implementations are, because I don't write production codes. In my case, the implementation is less my interest, but it's more, is it implementing the right logic?
Yeah.
More going to. So, okay. So they write the plan. Plan gets reviewed by humans. Then the code gets written by Claude Code based on the plan. And
Yeah.
then when there's a pull request open, there's the code that Claude Code generated. And then the plan that was agreed to in advance is
Yeah.
also included. Okay.
Yes.
So pull request gets open.
Yeah.
Now, something that you guys do is different, or now that Cloud Code came out with the PR capabilities, then a lot more people are using it. But you started doing this before. And so PR gets open. What happens next?
So now it's about reviewing the code, right? So we have two levels of reviewing the code. We have built an on-demand Claude skill that a developer runs when they are creating, or before they create a PR, they run this review skill, which looks
Mhm.
at the plan, which looks at the code, which looks at the AI slop, which looks at the test cases that you have written. So it does all of that evaluation. So this is an on-demand run by a developer, right?
Mhm.
Now, let's say as a developer, if you miss those, right, we also wanted to automate this. So we also have a Claude bot reviewer that runs when you submit a PR. So when you submit a PR, the bot kicks in. It has all of these checks about checking the plan, checking the code, checking the
Mhm.
architecture alignment, all of that. So it does that, and the review sits in the PR, right? So when as a
Mhm.
reviewer, I open the PR, I see the plan, I see the code, but I also see the review which is done by this bot
Mhm.
automatically. So now I have like a lot of things at my disposal to review the code. I don't need to read every line of the code now. The reviews are much faster. I just read few lines of the plan, then I read the review done by Claude.
And then I think in your post you wrote that basically Claude picks up all the basic stuff, like
Yeah,
the basic checks that you always have. It picks them up. It immediately can push back on them, and then that allows the humans to focus on the higher level things
yeah.
in that work. By the way, if Claude finds issues and comments on the pull request,
Mm.
does the developer then go and run their Claude with the comments that came from the PI? Like, how does that loop get closed at that point?
Yeah, so when a developer creates a PR, the Claude bot runs and it gives you the comments, right?
Mhm.
Then the developer
Mhm.
takes that PR, gives it to their Claude, and say, okay, go fix the comments which are from the reviewer. So it's mainly about how you use like different personas of Claude, right? So you have
Mhm.
a developer has a developer persona, but the Claude
Mhm.
bot has like a reviewer persona. So you
Mhm.
get those comments into the developer terminal, and they try to fix. They do like lot of iteration there as well. And then, once they have fixed all the comments, then the PR goes to the senior engineer.
Okay. Now what happens is PRs, the basic stuff has been flushed out and fixed. And
Yeah.
now it's only the things that you need humans for. You wrote a tool that every morning you can see what PRs need your attention, right? I saw you vibe coded a tool for doing that.
Yeah.
Why did you need that? Like, why not just go into GitHub in the morning and say, "Oh, okay, here are the 7 PRs that are waiting my attention." But why did you need this?
I think there are a lot of things that I found I needed. at that time. It was about how do I rank different PRs, what I need to look at first. So in GitHub, you do see all the PRs. You can sort them by, last modified, etc. You can see all of that. But what I cannot see without opening is the number of lines written in that, number of
Mm.
files changed in that, unless I click on every PR. And I wanted like a dashboard to quickly approve PRs, which were like short, right? Like a bug fix PR, I want to review it, like first thing in the morning. So I
Mhm.
built this dashboard that helps me, look at, okay, what are the top PRs that I can review while I'm having like a meeting, like I can do multitask with
Mhm.
these tools. Smaller PRs maybe don't need 100% of my attention. I can
Mhm.
review them while I'm doing some, attending a meeting or like listening to something as well.
Okay. Multitasking at actually one thing I noticed, the more I use cursor, the more I multitask. And I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily very good at multitasking, but
Mhm.
um I bought another screen, so now I have my third screen here because I needed a screen for cursor so that I can watch what it's doing, and as I'm on a Zoom, if I'm not the one talking, I can quickly take a look and give it another instruction. So sometimes it feels like my brain burns. I'm like, I feel overloaded with
Yeah.
all this multitasking, like talking to someone, working on cursor, handling things on the other screen over here. It feels like a lot. Does that happen to you at all?
Absolutely. So I think there was a time when I was working on like 4 to 5 Git work trees. Like of course, like 3 different terminals, but also like in the same terminal, I have 2, 3 different things going on. And I realized that I was mixing my prompt, right? So if I had to write a prompt onto the first terminal, I would rather put it in the second terminal, right?
Yep.
And I think over the time, I've started to realize that I cannot work on more than 3 things, and that's my limit. So now I have decided that I will not have more than 3 things in parallel. It could be maybe 2 GitHub repo and then, a meeting. But I'm not going
Yeah.
to do more than 3 things. I think that's a limit, or that's something as an individual you have to find for yourself, right? Like, what's
Yep.
your limit? How many of these multitasking tasks you can do in one go
Mhm.
without burning out and without feeling stressed, say Tuesday or Wednesday of your week, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to survive till Friday, right? So yeah, I think it's on every individual to find that bar, to find that limit.
Yeah. I'm probably on the 2 and 3 range too. I wonder if as, the next generation, so I have kids, they're 14, 12, and 10, and I wonder if when they get into the work world, the corporate life or whatever you want to call it, are they going to have more multitasking abilities than I do, for example, or than we do? Because if you think about it, if you took someone, a generation above us, to them working on Zoom, recording on Riverside, sending emails at the same time, WhatsApping with someone on another thing, like to them that looks like a lot.
Yeah.
And obviously the things that look normal to us today looked like a lot to someone who worked in the space a generation before us. So I'm wondering if the generation that follows is going to be able to multitask a lot more than we can today. What do you think? I know it's very theoretical, but what do you think?
It's really hard to speculate though, but I think the next generation is even smarter than us. I think they'll
Yeah.
find ways to maybe not only multitask, but also do things that our previous generation used to do in a much better way. I felt like the generation before us, like you said, didn't really do multitask, but they were still completing all the tasks that were required, right? And I think the new generation is going to find ways to not burn out, but still being able to check all the boxes. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think I have high hopes on the generation, and I think they have sort of clear boundaries of like creating that limit for themselves. Like if you talk
Hmm.
to Gen Z today, they have a clear understanding of where they want to stop, right? How do
Yep.
they define the whole work life balance? And although I don't know where it stands for me right now, like I don't know, I feel like it's a mixture. Like on Sunday sometimes I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should build this to help me on my Monday, and then Sunday night I'm sort of like vibe coding, that dashboard that I talked to you about. Now, I think the the work that I'm doing on Sunday evening is going to help me, maybe for the entire month. Right. So is that, I don't think that's too bad, right? Because if I spent like maybe 2 hours on Sunday, but it helps me for a month, I mean, sure, I can have a relaxing
Yeah.
month. I think that's okay, right?
Yeah, it's you're paying on a Sunday to be able to work maybe slightly less hard on a Wednesday, on
Yeah.
the following Wednesday, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
All
yeah,
right.
I wonder about that because I feel like at least in my role, it feels like we're on a treadmill that keeps running faster and faster. Like somebody keeps pressing the up button,
Yeah.
and what you do is you try to do more, do faster by by building all these tools for yourself. Like there's literally board decks, for example, for Solid. Half the board deck is built by Claude
Mm.
because there's recurring things. And it's okay, go and, it pulls it from our CRM and from our Slack and our email and Google Drive and all. Like it does prep work. So it cleared time for me. But then what I did is I filled that time by other things. I don't know if I'm doing more or I don't know. It's definitely interesting. So I guess speaking about doing more, so now the development is done with AI. So the planning, the coding, the review, the everything is done by AI.
Yeah.
Have you measured the change to the results of the team? So are you delivering more work items as a team? Are you delivering them faster? Are you delivering less bugs? How do you measure all that?
So the dashboard that I built earlier, right, was not only to help me review the PRs, but it was also about measuring the number of PRs that were approving and merging. So we
Hmm.
wanted to measure whether our productivity has really increased. Are we merging more PRs? Are we pushing, are we really shipping faster? So that dashboard did tell me that before, I think if I looked at the previous repos, maybe 6 months back when we were maybe not AI native engineers, I looked at some of the repos where the data showed me that we were merging maybe 5 to 6 PRs in a week, right? And that could the number of lines or the number of code could vary. So I'm not going to go into the code of those PRs, but that was the number that I saw. But now we are doing more than that every day. The data shows me that we are merging 5 to 10 PRs every single day.
Hmm.
The scale has changed drastically. I think we are shipping faster, we are developing faster, like the data shows that.
Yeah, we've been experiencing a similar thing. So our sprints at Solid are 3 weeks long.
Mm,
And I listened today to the sprint demo that we had at the end of the sprint now. And the VP of engineering said that we merged 170 PRs over the
mm,
last 3 weeks.
mm.
So, call it 50-ish PRs per week
Yeah.
across a team of 20 people.
Mm,
So two and a half, well, actually, it's slightly less than 20 people. So let's say 2.5 to 3 PRs per week per person, which is the most we've ever done. That's the highest rate. Now, the sizes of these PRs are the same sizes of the PRs we always had,
yeah.
even a year ago. The
Yeah.
number has increased. The number per person has increased. And I also listened to Lenny's podcast, and he was talking to the guy who built Cloud Code, and that guy said that the number of basically, I don't remember exactly the number he had of PRs that he ships, but we did the calculation, and he ships 30 times more PRs
Yeah.
than the non AI assistant software developer. 30 times more.
Yeah.
So is that where we're going? Just talking about the whole our previous conversation of what we're doing and balancing. So is that what's going to happen? So the expectation from software developers will be, the standards will be, okay, you need to ship 10, 20, 30 times of what you would have shipped 5 years ago. Is that what you see was going to happen?
I think it's already happening, right? That is the expectation we have today, that you have all the possible tools at your disposal. Now you are shipping faster, you are writing the code faster, so we are delivering faster. Like it's not something that I'll ask a year from now, and it's something that we are asking today. Yeah, and the data shows that we are actually doing that. Like you also said that you have 50 PRs a week.
Yeah.
That's the current stat that we're talking about. But I also feel that over the time, it's not just gonna be about writing code. It's gonna be about how you build the whole life cycle around this, right? So it's when you look at a product development, right? It's about gathering the requirement, it's about writing the code, it's about testing, it's about evaluating, right? I think the focus right now is on the testing and is on the evaluation, right? So
Mhm.
we are focusing a lot on EDD and TDD, where we say that you write the test cases, you understand the evaluation, you understand the ground truth data, so you understand what you're really going to build, and then you make that a part of the development, right? So now the
Mhm.
focus is more on, we are using tools like Langfuse, we are using tools like Brain Trust to evaluate, to hook the ground truth data, to review the output these agentic workflows are producing for us. So that's going to become like a key metric for this year.
So when you're measuring the productivity of the team, so there's, the number of PRs, there's the quality, the EDD, the evaluation driven design, and then the TDD, the test driven design. So that helps you validate the quality of it. Do you find that AI is creating slop or a mess in your
Yeah.
code that you need to clean up over time? Like, are we paying something on the other side where the AI is creating more work for us somehow?
Yes, and no. Like today, yes, we do see a lot of AI slop. We see a lot of dead code, especially when you have a lot of people using AI, right? The slop started to vary, right? Let's say I worked on a story and then somebody else is adding an enhancement to it. I created a slop, I created a dead code. Now, other developers or other engineers, Claude is not going to read the code that's not working. It's going to read at what's working and then build on top of it, and it's going to create its own slop. But I also feel that with the evolution that's happening in the base models, like we now use Opus 4.6 or Sonnet 4.6 to write a code, and the way I think Anthropic is shipping their models and shipping Claude code, the enhancements, I think all of these will soon be taken care, and it will be thing of the past as well. Like today we look at the AI slop. Today we look at the dead codes, all the unused imports, etc.
Mhm.
And we have added these into our review skills, which reviews the code.
Okay.
So a lot of this is done automatically. Like we don't have a human checking AI slop. It's done by AI. But I think over the time, this will be built into the Claude code to make sure that it's not generating any slop. It's not generating dead code as well.
Okay. So the dead code and the slop is not a big issue and will be solved on its own. What you care about more is testing the code functionality that it works. And if it works and it passes the evals and the TDD, etc., then some slop is acceptable because it's just part of it and you clean it over time. Is
Yeah.
that a right way to think about it?
Yes, and I think slop was always there. Like even when humans were writing code,
Yeah.
we can say,
True.
right? Like we did not write slop-free code. Slop has been there. Maybe
Yeah.
now the pace at which the slop is written is little higher, but slop has
Yeah.
always been there, right?
Yeah, that's true. My code was always messy. My personal code in my previous startup, the VP of engineering, who's the same guy, the same VP of engineering here at Solid. His name is Alon. He barred me from writing code. He said, "You can't write any more code because your code is a mess. You don't
Hmm.
follow guidelines. You don't always have unit tests and stuff like that." So he said, "You can't write any code anymore." And I can respect that. So yeah, I was probably a human slop creator. Okay. I listened to you talk at that talk a year ago.
Hmm.
Now, can you imagine what your talk would be a year from now? So let's say March 2027,
Hmm.
it was from a, data analyst, automated AI data analyst to now code is being written by Claude Code and humans are only involved in the evaluation and checking the plan and all that. A year from now, if I had you here in the podcast again, what are we going to be talking about?
Well, it's really hard to imagine. I think with the pace, the things are changing every week. It's really hard to imagine. But if I have to, I think so. I try to connect a lot of work we are doing with how we were doing maybe a decade back or 5 years back, right?
Hmm.
So if we look at decade back, there was a concept called RPA, right? Robotic process automation, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
Right.
robotic process automation.
Right. So when we started looking at RPA, it was about automating all the manual things that we were doing. We
Hmm.
started evaluating whatever we were doing manually, and it was a process to automate a lot of these things. And when I was working at that time on RPA, the idea was that anything that you are doing more than 5 times, it needs to be automated. You shouldn't be doing it
Hmm.
manually. So that
Hmm.
was like basic guideline. And now I think that has changed with the AI, with the AI tools. I think the number has reduced from 5 to 3 or maybe even 2, right? So anything that you're doing more than 3 times or more than 2 times, it should be all done by AI, right? So that number has changed. So I think that maybe is still going to evolve over time. Anything that I'm doing more than 2 times a day, I'll put that in an agent or in an automated AI system that'll do. And then I think I've also talked about how this whole SDLC cycle is AI native. Like we are
Hmm.
talking about not just AI engineering, we are talking about AI native engineering, right?
Hmm.
So the freshers or the college grads who are joining these companies, I think are AI. They are I think feel like they are more AI native than we are, right?
Hmm.
Because they don't know how to work without AI, right? So
Yep.
their thinking process starts with AI, right? I think they're gonna come up with more and more ideas and more innovation about not just SDLC, but the whole cycle of how we think of a new product, how we come up with an idea of building a new product, right? For example, now I look at, okay, these are the problems I have at my hand, and I need to build the solutions to automate these using AI. I think
Hmm.
after 1 year, the problems are also going to vary. The problems are also going to change a lot, and the way we build solutions is also going to evolve. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question.
It basically you're sort of so what you're saying is let's talk about the freshers, the those fresh out of college. I can maybe equate it to a world where workstations, personal computers, etc., entered the corporate world, and then in parallel they entered the college and university world, the academic world. And at some point, those coming out of college were already well versed in using a computer.
Yeah.
And so they could do stuff with it that maybe the people that were working back then didn't know how to do or didn't think about doing because they grew up in a pre-computer world, pre-personal computer world, and then they adapted. So those freshers back then could do things or think about things that the current workers couldn't. And so what you're saying is now there's going to be a point where people who come out of college, they did their entire computer science degree, let's say, or whatever degree using AI. They're so used to it. When they enter the corporate world, they will put it to use that we can't even imagine. Like we can't think of right now. They will do it because it will be so native to them.
Yeah.
Um, so that's interesting. That will make it very interesting, obviously. There's a lot of talk about how those fresh out of college are having a hard time finding a job because a lot of what they can do, AI can do.
Yeah.
So, how do you reconcile these two things? On the one hand, the freshers will bring in new ways of doing things that we can't think of, but on the other hand, nobody's hiring them because AI can do the stuff that they can do. So, how do you reconcile that?
I think, in my personal opinion, the profiles, the roles that we are hiring for are also going to change over
Okay.
time, depending upon the problems that we are solving, right?
Hmm.
Like maybe last year, I was checking how, when I hire a developer or an engineer, I was checking how they are writing code. But today, I'm not looking at how they are writing code, I'm looking at how they are thinking about solving this particular problem.
Hmm.
So the change is about what kind of roles we are looking at, what kind of people we want to hire. I think that's also going to evolve. So let's say today we are hiring software developers. Maybe after 5 years, we'll hire software thinkers. You never know. I feel
Mm.
like, the roles, the kind of work we do is changing. So the profiles are also going to change, and the way we hire these grads are also going to evolve.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, I mean, we're not going to need developers anymore. You think we'll need thinkers, planners,
Yeah,
dreamers, maybe.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the profile will also change. I think for software development, you need a certain profile, like someone who's really good at math and their brain works a very specific way, etc. But if you don't need that anymore, then maybe you have other people in the creation of software,
Yeah.
with other skills. It'll be really interesting. So I guess your point is we don't know. A year from now, you don't know exactly what we're going to be talking about, and you can see some trends and take some bets, but it's very hard for you to put the finger on it. Which I agree. I can understand that
Mm.
how complicated that is. Okay, so that was a really interesting conversation. So we're nearing the end of the episode, and at the end of the episode, I always ask a few questions. So one of them I basically did. Where would be a year from now? Usually I say 5 years, but where would be a year from now is a good one. And I probably know the answer to this, but what is an AI tool you can't live without?
I do want to say Claude Code or Claude, dot AI.
Yeah. Yeah, I assume that was the answer. What is an AI myth you'd bust in one sentence? Is something that people are saying about AI that you think is nonsense? What do you think that is?
I'll have to think about that. I do want to say that the myth, no, that's not a myth. That might be true. I don't know. So when I talk to a lot of people, I think who are trying to upskill in AI, they find it hard to upskill. Think that's a myth. Like upskilling today is quite easy. We have so much content, so many tutorials available at our disposal to learn and to upskill. And
Hmm.
I think it's just about finding that path, finding what you're looking for. There is just like, even if you look at OpenAI's tutorials, you look at Claude's tutorials, right? Anthropic has published like an Anthropic Academy where you can learn a lot about how we are using tools. So I think the upskilling is not as difficult as it may seem. Like today, I think upskilling is quite easy. If you have the right intention, if you have the time, I think upskilling is easy now.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope everyone has the intention to do it. But yeah, I see your point. Like a lot of people were talking about how hard it was for them to learn AI, but there's basically you're saying there's all the tools now. There's no excuse for not learning how to use these tools. Amazing. Okay. Is there a source? So first of all, for the listeners, if you're not familiar with Rittika's medium, so it's RITTIKAJINDAL.medium.com. So I really suggest following her there and reading her content, or finding Ritika on LinkedIn and following her there. But other than your medium, what is a source that you recommend for people to read? Podcast, blog, book that you recommend people to read, and it could be an AI, and it doesn't have to be. It could be in a completely different space.
I think there are several tools. One is you can just open any tool, any LLM, you can just start asking questions to LLM and sort of like prepare about the topic that you're interested to learn about. But also, I think there are already so many tutorials. Like if you look at Andrew Ng's, right, deeplearning.ai,
Yeah.
there are just so many free courses available that
Mhm.
anybody can learn through. And let's say if you want to learn about how Claude is working, you can look at Anthropic Academy. If you want to learn
Mhm.
about how OpenAI is building or how the prompt engineering, all of that, I think OpenAI also have their own learning documentation. So I would say if you want to start from scratch, maybe start by looking at the documentation that's published by all of these enterprises, that like the foundation model enterprises. And then you can also learn from the deeplearning.ai. There are like 100 plus courses, and I think Andrew Ng really picks up so I think last year he created a course which is about writing code with AI, which
Mhm.
I had not seen before. Like we were all doing it, but nobody was creating a tutorial or a course about it. So I think
Mhm.
that's a really interesting tutorial, for even like a product manager or a product owner to just see, how developers are writing code with AI. I think Andrew Ng is creating like fabulous courses for all of us. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I took a couple of the courses on his site. They build it really well. It's really easy to internalize and to understand. So I agree with you. Okay, amazing, Rittika. I'm so happy we got to do this, and I'm really actually looking forward to doing this again a year from now and seeing how things changed, because obviously things change a lot and they change fast, they change quickly. But really, thank you very, very much for being here, Rittika. And for those listening to the podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, thumbs up, whatever it may be on the platform that you're listening to this to. And we are going to see you next time. Bye,
Thank
Rittika.
thank you. Bye bye.